Antarctica, the world's greatest freezer, is melting. Trillions of gallons are draining into the oceans. Sea levels are rising. It's happened before, and it's happening again right now.
It's not a question of will sea level rise a large amount. It's only a question of how fast that will occur.
How will humans fight back before our cities are inundated?
Holding off the sea would be the major employer of the world by 2100.
Massive levees to defend our coastlines. Floating towns and cities. Vast dams connecting continents. It's our greatest challenge yet, Earth underwater. This is New York in the 24th century. Sea levels have risen by 120 feet. Manhattan is flooded. What could cause such a terrifying scenario? The answer lies here, in Antarctica, where vast amounts of frozen water are locked up in ice. Some of Antarctica's ice sheets are more than 2 miles thick. If melted, this ice would dramatically raise sea levels. And the melting has already started. After hundreds of flights, they calculate that Antarctica contains over 90% of the world's ice. Together with Greenland, it's enough to raise global sea levels by an astonishing 230 feet. This is what North America would look like if all of the planet's ice melted. Europe would also shrink. London's Tower Bridge would become a solemn monument in the sea. Berlin would be flooded, as would Paris. But how likely is such a scenario? Is sea level rise reality or myth? Repeats itself. Our coastal cities would be inundated. Sea level rise is not a myth. It could happen again, just as it's happened before. The beginning of the most recent ice age was 70,000 years ago. The ice sheets expanded, the planet's landmass grew, and sea levels fell. Then temperatures rose again. The ice receded. Sea levels climbed and eventually settled at today's coastlines. But global temperatures are on the rise again. This time from humans burning huge amounts of fossil fuels. They produce CO2 and other greenhouse gases that heat up our atmosphere. Whenever global temperatures rise, sea levels follow.
We have emitted so much carbon dioxide that the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere has increased by about 1/3 in the last 100 years, and it is now higher than any time since at least 1 million years. We expect about 3, 4, even 5 degrees centigrade warming in this century. The warmer it gets, the faster the sea level rises. That means sea level rise will get faster and faster as we heat up the planet more.
Of course, predicting future sea level rise is difficult, as the planet has never before experienced the dramatic increase in CO2 of the last 100 years.
Area through here. So our $1 billion of houses
we get 1 meter, 3 feet of sea level rise, and every single one of these houses is useless. Who's going to buy them? What happens to this $1 billion of real estate by the time we get 3 feet? I mean, it's gone. It's useless. It's just, you scrape it off with bulldozers, and you just leave it here. That's what will happen. It'll just be left here.
And it's not just residential properties that will be affected.
Think of all the wharves and all the places where ships offload and onload all the goods and services. And if sea level rises even 3, 4, 5 feet, every single one of those ports has to be replaced. The cruise ship lines, there are billions of dollars of infrastructure that even a small sea level rise takes out. You got to rebuild it all over again.
After 4 feet of sea level rise, electricity supplies would be affected as coastal power plants are flooded. After 5 feet, some of Florida's freshwater resources would be contaminated with seawater, and the Everglades National Park becomes a vast bay. After 6 feet, millions of Floridians would have to evacuate the state.
So what's going to happen to Florida?
By 2100, we'll be at least 4 to 6 feet higher. So this tide, which is not a high tide, will be about here, up to here. There's no way that we can keep the sea back as it rises. Miami-Dade County will be severely diminished.
By 2100, after 6 feet of sea level rise, Miami would look like this. One city determined to defend itself against the sea is New Orleans, Louisiana. During Hurricane Katrina in 2005, large parts of New Orleans were flooded after a storm surge raised sea levels by 20 feet. The city lies several feet below sea level. Its antiquated locks and levees weren't strong enough to hold back the rising sea. As the storm pushed the Gulf's surging waters into Lake Borgne and onwards into the city's canals, New Orleans' sea defenses broke in 50 places.
We had some levee and flood wall failures in the hurricane system. And the combination of that overtopping of the levees and the flood walls that failed caused massive flooding throughout the city. About 80% of the city of New Orleans was flooded following Hurricane Katrina.
To prevent New Orleans from flooding again, the U.S. government is investing billions of dollars in the city's sea defenses. Along the riverbanks, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is strengthening New Orleans' levees and locks. Their work here provides future insight into the kinds of construction that may be needed to protect coastal cities around the world against rising sea levels. As global temperatures rose, the planet's ice sheets melted into the sea. Sea levels increased by a staggering 390 feet until they settled at today's levels. How fast did this happen? The answer may help predict how quickly sea levels could rise in the next century, and how much time we have to defend our coasts. If sea levels rose by an additional 16 feet per century, hundreds of thousands of people would lose their homes in the Bay Area. If sea levels rise by 6 feet this century, local rivers will be contaminated with salt and California's main fresh water supply will be lost. In the next century, after an additional 16 feet, the entire delta will be claimed by the sea. This is the worst-case scenario. CO2 levels triple, global temperatures dramatically increase, and the Antarctic rapidly melts. The world's coastlines are eroded as sea levels rise by an additional 50 feet by the end of the 23rd century. By the time all of the Antarctic's ice has melted, Denmark, the Netherlands, and large parts of northern Germany and France will be lost. Significant sea level rise may turn Berlin into a coastal town within centuries. Another 100 years, and the city would be lost to the sea. The rising sea would creep up the River Seine and find its way to Paris. With an elevation of 115 feet, the French capital would be vulnerable to sea level rise. After all of the planet's ice is melted, it will flood.
The affluent countries would try to protect their borders against millions and millions who would be leaving the areas most severely affected.
Sea levels rising 250 feet, that bridge would have seawater lapping around the roadway. New York City as we know it would not exist.
But there is a way that New York might adapt even to extreme sea level rise. The idea is to build on water. Here in the Netherlands are several communities of floating houses. Koen Olthaus is a visionary architect who believes these houses are the beginning of a new trend.